This year, the Metrobank Girls in Cricket Fund crowned 38 winners of the Metrobank Champion of Girls Cricket Award. That's one in every county. These winners have gone above and beyond to deliver growth and sustainability of girls' cricket in their area. A huge thank you for all the work that you do to transform the game for girls. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. On today's show, we'll be doing a deep dive into where Indian cricket is right now after the potentially transformative introduction of the WPL. We'll also chat about auction dynamics and how that affects players. I'm Rana, and first you'll hear from Lauren Winfield-Hill on how players are picked up by different tournaments, and then Katya Witney talked to Indian journalist, author and all-round cricket expert Karunya Keshav about women's cricket in India right now. So we're talking a few weeks after the WPL auction, which is the third version of the WPL, and that starts in late February. And we were just chatting after last week's episode about the weirdness of the auction, because on the one hand, you've got someone like Nat Sivabrunt. She picks up a sum of money that makes her basically the highest paid British sportswoman. But on the other hand, there's a massive drop-off in what other players get, and actually not many overseas players do get picked up. You also have the slightly odd auction dynamics that mean that this year some very, very young players who haven't played top-level cricket yet took home enormous sums of money. Obviously, it's a carbon copy of the IPL model that has existed for 15 years, but I think as this competition is a newer one, it's fair to ask what we think of it. Lauren, what do you make of it 3 years in? There's some bits of it that I do feel quite uncomfortable about. It's a very public thing. It's literally an auction involving human beings. You literally have someone with a paddle put their hand up, and for some players that might be a very awkward and public humiliation.
Yeah, it's not cattle and it's not sheep, is it? So it's a little bit unusual. I think it's quite confronting as a player to have a price tag literally shown to the world of what the person with the paddle believes you're worth. And if you're worth a lot, that's great. But if you're not, it can be quite confronting. And then there's probably the other piece where if your name gets called and you don't get picked, is like that's quite confronting as well. It's almost like an X Factor audition that the world sees that you get 3 X's and nobody wants you. So it is quite a confronting thing, I think, for players. Like I know times when we were at the T20 World Cup in South Africa and the first auction was going on, there was a lot of just tension in the air and anxiety around for a lot of players because it was such a big deal. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the WPL is different to the others, whereby you do have a few surprises with price tags of, like you say, younger players or players, that you're quite surprised at the kind of money that they fetch. And then there's a handful of players where you think, geez, yeah, I'd have thought she'd have gone for more than that. Whereby if you look at like the other comps that are sort of compared in the 100, the Big Bash, you don't get as many surprises. You think, oh yeah, she could be worth slightly less, slightly more, but like there's nothing where it's like hugely significant, which is obviously a bit more unique to the WPL, is just that differentiation between, like the rich and the poor, really.
Yeah, and how much do players talk about it when it's going on and in the build-up to it? Because it's actually pretty frequent that it does happen when players are together and they're playing either a World Cup or a bilateral series.
Yeah, and I remember when we were at the T20 World Cup in South Africa, and it was obviously the first one. It was something that we even had a players meeting about, and how we were going to deal with it. We were actually playing on that day as well, which was quite difficult. It was, I remember basically everyone was on their phones on the bus going to the ground. And it was who's been picked, who hasn't, who's gone unsold. And we're literally watching it go through as we're driving to go and play a World Cup fixture. And there was the deciding was that people wanted to know before the game. So they didn't want to go into the game not knowing whether they were sold or unsold. But the minute we got to the ground, there was no mention of it. So that was sort of the agreement that we came to as players. But yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you've probably got half the camp that are happy and half the camp that are a little bit disappointed. And nobody probably outwardly says it. They'll go, you'll be the classic, oh, well, I didn't think I'd get picked up or whatever. But, we all know deep down that everyone wants to play in these comps. So if you're not picked, then, especially if you're a player who's likely to, you can often see, all right, well, a few teams need opening bats or opening bowlers or whatever, and you think, oh, well, I'm that skill set, and you probably get a little bit of hope. Whereas there'll be some skill sets that you probably know, or even like where you're at form wise or things like that, where you sort of know what's likely to play out. But the ones who have a little bit more hope on the other, on the basis of those things, it's tough. It's definitely tough then going to play an international an hour and a half later.
Yeah. I mean, did you think that the auction should almost be just every year made sure that it's at a complete, if they stick with having an auction down the line, just make sure that it doesn't clash with international cricket, because or, whatever way round it is, because that must be really tough with players literally going out to represent their countries when a massive decision on their near future is happening in the background.
Yeah, it was crazy because I remember it was like we were leaving for we'd had a team meeting, so we always had a team meeting then on the bus and go. And we were in the team meeting in India with the team next door, and they had it up on the big screen. They were watching it, and there's just like massive cheers, and Shafali's gone for a truckload, and Mandana, and but then you're thinking there's probably half that room sat there really devastated. Like it's quite an interesting dynamic for a team to manage. And then, like you say, for us, we had to then, go and play several hours later. So, I mean, yeah, in an ideal world, you would have it not clash with international fixtures and things like that. But you sort of like, then if every comp, then the 100 draft won't want to like clash with something. And then the Big Bash draft. And it's like, there's going to be that much stuff that pops up in the near future as well. Is how do you really, it's hard enough trying to outline cricket to not clash, let alone the auctions and the drafts.
No, it's quite interesting. Do you think the headline pay stuff is sometimes overblown a little bit? Because obviously for I don't know, 15 to 25 players, the sums of money are truly huge. But specifically for overseas players, there aren't that many for whom actually pick up those huge sums of money. And even for those who pick up decent sums of money, comparable to what you get maybe in the BBL or the 100, there is very little protecting you for longevity in the competition. You can get a pretty decent pay packet one year, and the next year you're released. So even though the headline figures might be quite big, it's not actually quite the total game changer as it is sometimes made out, because that Nat Silver Brunt fee, for example, is something that is always referenced, but that's not representative of the experience for even established international English players.
Yeah, yeah. If you talk about your Kate Crosses, and even when Heather Knight played, like you look at her pay packet, Danny Wyatt, she was on base, she got picked up for base price when she was at the UP Warriors, and obviously she's been traded. But she was picked up, super cheap. So, like you say, it's the gap between the rich and the poor is quite huge. And sometimes it's reflective of the skill and the talent, but it's not always. You look at someone. I'll use the Danny Wyatt example, and her, she went for base price, but I don't know, she's played like 200 internationals, the T20 internationals, or something crazy. She's probably one of the box office players in the world in that format. But it's not you get somebody who's on significantly more than that probably doesn't have the same caliber and international experience. So it's not always worthy sounds really harsh, but it's not always necessarily done on experience, skill sets, international caps, etc. It can just be a little bit luck of the draw of what the team wants and needs at that point. And because of the nature of that, it means that you're sort of hero to zero pretty quick, aren't you?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there are examples in this year's auction of incredibly inexperienced players being among the highest earners. And if you look at the men's competition, that there are examples of players who have gone for huge sums of money as teenagers, and they have basically been on the edge of the professional game by the time they're 21, because franchises in some years where they might have massive amounts of budget left going into towards the end of the auction, they're like, well, we might as well take a punt on someone because our squad looks quite full. And then because the player's gone for so much money, there's so much scrutiny on what they do. I think I'm right in saying one of the youngest players in IPL history has basically not played since making their debut. So
Yeah, I go back to like, I think of someone like Prithvi Shaw, who were like, like Delhi Capitals. People were raving about Prithvi Shaw. Like he came on, he burst onto the scene, and like I've seen that this year he's not even like he didn't even get picked up like second time round. He's nowhere to be seen. He's played for India. Like he was the gun player. He was the 20-year-old that he was going to be the next Sachin Tendulkar. And that's that real like hero to zero, isn't it? And now he's not in the IPL. He's played for Northants a bit, and he's playing domestic cricket in India, but it's quite a big fall from grace.
No, absolutely. By comparison, how does it work with the 100 and the WBBL? Do you think they get it better?
I think it's pretty much reflective of contribution and experience and international experience. I think most teams try to set up where it's fair, like who you're not paying over the odds for someone that's not worth that, and you're not trying to burgle a deal out of somebody that's played 150 games for their country, or in the same sense of if you're an all-rounder or if you've got one skill and things like that. I feel like I can only talk from experience both at the Superchargers and the Oval Invincibles, obviously in a captaincy point of view, but that's generally how we've tried to do it. Is you do it on contribution, really, existing experienced contributions that you've seen, and then you've got you've got the potential piece, which is sort of like they're in the middle. Like we're not sure what they can do, so we don't want to pay over the odds for them yet because we don't know what they can do. But equally, we know that they've got the potential to sort of contribute quite heavily in the skill set or just like the potential and the talent that they've got. But I do think the draft opens it up a bit more. We have had some players in the English game where you think played a bit over the odds for that person, or there might even be a fringe player that's gone for sort of 20-30 grand a year or two ago. But generally speaking, especially with the retentions, and even generally speaking with the draft, it's sort of, there's a few anomalies where you think, that's a bit over or that's a bit under. But generally speaking, I don't think there's as many that sort of turn heads in those comps where, like the Big Bash would be structured very similarly to the 100, I'd imagine. I think it's not quite as public as what the 100 is in terms of everybody sees your value. But, I would be putting a pretty big guess on the fact that they would structure it very similar to the 100 in terms of how they pay their players.
And then from a planning point of view, as skipper, how involved are you in the whole retention process, and when does that all kick off? Because obviously the 100 is still absolutely ages away, but sometimes obviously these things happen earlier than you think.
Yeah, like there's obviously the window's open now, like the retention window. Obviously you can retain 10 players. I think that's until the middle of Feb, so you've got ages really. Obviously, naturally, human nature, everyone wants to sort of know what's happening and put out feelers if nothing's happening, as soon as you can, really. But that's until like mid-Feb. I think, yeah, like me and JB communicate quite a lot in terms of sort of plans, structures, players with like year after, players you want to keep. We're both really big on like the whole keeping the core together, and valuing our English players. That, I don't know, I just think with these comps is like they're not going to pull out. They're not going to, they're not going to have a board intervene or things like that. And they're the people that you sort of invest in for 3, 4, 5 years that can give you sustained success. So that's sort of our way of thinking. And And then, like we've been pretty successful squad team, men's and women's for since the start of the comp really. So you're just trying to plug the holes and get the a couple of players that you think can plug the holes and make you stronger again. And you want them to be the right fit personality wise. That's quite a big one in terms of getting the right people for our dressing room to fit in the culture as well. So yeah, I mean it is it's weird because it's sort of like this window opens and then there's loads of chat and there's different, like I could imagine now when the England girls out in the Ashes is like, oh, who's been retained, where we going, what we doing, like there's loads of chatter. But really you got until mid-Feb to sort of have your conversations and to have all your retentions in before the draft. So it's sort of everything happens, but then nothing happens for weeks on end, and then you're just waiting for the draft to come around, and you should be in pretty good order by then. But yeah, it's like for us in that sort of belief is you're trying to hold on to your best of what you've got already before you look elsewhere, and then you look elsewhere for the gaps really.
Mm. Do the tail enders boys get involved? The oval chairs, Greg James and Felix White?
No, I don't. They don't. Well, not as far. Like not necessarily with me. Like I know that there is a big process to it. Like in terms of obviously, like there's the cricket chat, which is the coaches, you know, senior players. Like I would speak to Cappy and players like that, who are part of like our leadership team and discuss thoughts, feelings. Who do you like? Who do you think could help make us better? And obviously with JB and the coaching staff. But I think there is quite a lot like board level that goes on as well in terms of, this is who we want, this is how much we want to pay for them. They sort of then add their piece and sign it off essentially. So it's not something that I'm like fully over, but I know that is what happened. It's not like you just say, "Oh, I want her," and we've offered her this, and she's texted on WhatsApp and said she's in, and then it's all done. Like I think that's where the tail ender boys sort of get involved more so over that, like that decision making piece higher up.
No, I love that they're involved in it. I feel like cricket. I feel like cricket could do more with really active and present owners. In football, you've got you've got the evil owners, right? Who everyone's got an opinion on, and I think cricket needs evil owners. I'm not saying that they're evil, but I think we need other people to be the evil owners. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, no, it was actually really cool. Like when we had our season launch with the guys as well, and the tail ender boys were there. Like it was great to just have chats and just speak to them in terms of like how the role came about, like why they wanted to be involved, their sort of vision, and that sort of stuff, and actually like speak to them about the ovals and have conversations with them, which was really cool actually to get an understanding from their point of view is like, well, why the ovals, why cricket, like what do you want from us, what can we do for you, sort of thing. And they're just great, like two great guys who just love cricket and want to see us do well basically. And whatever that sort of takes, they're right behind. So yeah, it's really cool actually, like I think sometimes you can collaborate so much, like sport can bring people together so much better than it sometimes does. Especially cricket, you try and like preserve tradition all the time, but actually like collaborating with some different people for some different walks of life is really cool and adds a lot of strength to the whole system really.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for today. Cheers, Lauren. We'll be back next week with our big fat Ashes preview.
Joining us on this episode, we have friend of the show and Indian cricket journalist Karunya Keshav to talk about where India are at as a side going forward into a year where they will host the 50-over World Cup for the first time since 2013. At the time of recording, India are 1-0 up in their T20 series against the West Indies, having just been beaten 3-0 by Australia in an ODI series last week. So busy, busy, busy. Karunya, looking back at this year to start with, it's been a tough year for India. They lost the final of the Asia Cup to Sri Lanka and were knocked out of the T20 World Cup in the group stages. What's gone wrong for them in T20 knockout competitions?
It's been a tricky year, actually. You mentioned that it's been a tough year, but you ask Harmanpreet Kaur, she'd say it's just one or two series that haven't gone their way. Um, and as you said, they've done pretty okay. They're doing okay in the ICC Women's Championship in terms of the leaderboard. They've won the big series. Obviously, the Australia one was didn't go their way at all. And as Harmanpreet Kaur said recently, they've done well at home. Um, but it's again these big moments that they've not been winning, and that's been the problem for a while now. And I think the same questions are coming up over and over again for Harmanpreet Kaur and anyone running Indian cricket. Like, what is going wrong at the final hurdle? One thing that comes up again and again is mindset. That's what that's what the captain has said many times over now. But at a point, you really have to you can take a step back and think about what more needs to be done, because they've got the mental training coaches, they've got the therapists that they wanted. They've had a lot of these discussions about clearing that final hurdle. There was a very interesting question asked of Jemima at yesterday's T20. She won the Player of the Match award. And it was specifically about the fielding, where there were a lot of catches being dropped, and that's again one of the issues that have been identified with this team, that they drop catches at crucial moments. And she said, we're putting in the work, we're doing a lot of hard work, and I think that is there to be seen. But it's just those little moments that that isn't clicking for them. Very often, maybe they come up against Australia in these big moments, but very often, as in the Asia Cup, they came up against the side that was just very inspired to play against them. So it's a tricky one to say what's going wrong. I think one of the big things this year has been the inconsistency with the team and with the selections. I think when at the end of the year, when you look at you try to evaluate where the team is at, I think you have to look beyond the results to an extent. So like yesterday, they had a great game. Everything clicked. Everybody played their best game. And when everyone in the Indian team played their best game, they're an incredible side. But that doesn't seem to be happening when it matters. So yeah, it's a really tricky one. And looking just beyond the results, it's just this lack of cohesion, lack of coherence in what their plans are. They say they want to play a certain brand of cricket, but the minute they put under pressure, that seems to go away. Like, for example, at the T20 World Cup against Pakistan, against New Zealand, even if you say the first game against New Zealand, which they lost, was an aberration, they were just really taken aback by a side that really came at them. What happened in the next game? Where did that brand of cricket go? When you talk about playing brave cricket, about playing attacking cricket, which isn't to say that's the only way to play at all, but once you've committed to playing a certain kind of cricket, where is that in the moments that really matter? And are you giving the players enough confidence to play that way over a really long time? And that I'm not sure is happening, because there's just so much churn in the side. Nobody knows if their place is guaranteed. I think there may be like maybe three people in the side right now who can say that they have their place guaranteed. But for example, Arundhati Reddy, who just had an incredible match against Australia, I think her figures in the ODI, the third ODI against Australia, were the best by a pacer in this decade, this century, I think, by visiting pacer against Australia. And she was dropped for the next series. She's been the best pacer all year, despite not playing playing most of the matches, and then she's dropped. Why? And I think that sort of accountability, that sort of clarity just isn't there. And honestly, Arundhati Reddy is just one of the names that are, you see 2, 3 different names in every series, and then you're wondering where did they go the next series. I think there are those little bits that aren't really coming together for the team.
Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of things you said there. You mentioned the game against Pakistan in the T20 World Cup. That was after India had lost their first game to New Zealand, and they took, I think it was 19 overs to chase 105, which obviously was not going to make a big impact on their net run rate. Wouldn't have mattered in the end because they went out on points, but at that point it was quite a significant talking point. What stood out to me in that World Cup was the final group stage game against Australia, where they needed 14 runs off the final over to win, and lost 4 wickets. And that reminded me of when they lost against Australia again in the previous T20 World Cup in the semi-final. So when you say it always seems to be against Australia, it does kind of always seem to be against Australia. We've talked a lot on this podcast about England having a pressure problem. Can you apply the same to India? It's so hard to pinpoint in that scenario what goes wrong and how you can solve that. And it seems like there's a couple of sides struggling with that at the minute.
Yeah, it's absolutely a pressure problem, but I think there's another level to it also. We've identified that in the last or towards the end of the chase, very often India tend to lose a lot of wickets, which means there's no one supporting either Jemima or Harmanpreet Kaur there at the back end of an innings. You also identified, I think, at least 5, 6 years ago that you need that finisher, but there's very little work done to develop that finisher or find that finisher. I know they've tried a few people. They were hoping Pooja Vastrakar would do it. They were, I think they did have there was a brief moment where India hoped that the Sharma would be that finisher, which all of which hasn't worked out. But at the same time, when you have found a Richa Ghosh who's done that work at the domestic level, um, right now there's a bit of there's again a lack of clarity about where she comes in. You also want one of your best players, which is Harmanpreet Kaur, to be there at the end of the innings. So if you have Smriti at top, who's your best batter, who's going to anchor your game at the top of the innings, then you have Harman at the second half. But then again, there's a bit of they're not clear about where they want to play Harman again. At the World Cup, you come in saying you want to play her at 3, which is great. I mean, if you want to go that way, if that's the plan that you've made, great. But then maybe you kind of have to commit to it a few games before the World Cup, and by few I mean maybe like 10, 15 even. New Zealand. Sophie Devine mentioned that they were planning for the India game a year in advance. And I think that sort of vision is what is needed for India as well. So yes, they're losing wickets in clumps towards the end, but that's sort of a symptom of a bigger problem in which they don't know what their best 11 is in what batting order yet. And that comes down again to plans, to grooming players, to identifying talent, and all of those steps also seem to be a little incomplete right now.
Yeah, to pick up on the Harmanpreet number 3 thing, India have tried 6 different batters in that position this year. Jemima Rodriguez scored 73 against the West Indies yesterday, named player of the match. Delayan Hamalata has also batted at 3 7 times this year. Harmanpreet Kaur, Yastika Bhatia, Sajivan Sajana, and Uma Shetty have also batted at number 3 this year. So it does seem like there is a lot of confusion over roles. And when you also look at the criticism over the side that they got the balance wrong in the T20 World Cup with Dipti Sharma coming in at 6, she did move down to 7 in that first game against West Indies. It does really feel like there is a little bit of confusion at the minute over how they're going to approach different situations, especially in conditions like they faced in Bangladesh that were really, really slow.
Yeah, they've gone with I think 6 bowlers for a lot of time of the past year. And you're not really sure whether you need that extra bowler when maybe your batting is not that strong. I know you're saying these aren't just bowlers that are all-rounders, but they haven't proven to be the all-rounders that the world-class batting all-rounders who can finish a game for you. So that again is more of a tactical error, maybe, when you can say, what is your balance? Do you want more batting or do you want more bowling? Yesterday again, I don't think they needed that extra bowler at all. They had that backup in Sajna, but they didn't need her at all. So on the day it works great, but otherwise maybe they don't really have that plan set yet also.
Just picking up on some positives for India, because I feel like we've been pretty negative on them during this podcast. Dipti Sharma and Renuka Singh Thakur are both equal for number 4, I think, in the women's T20I bowling rankings this year. Of all full member nations, I think Dipti Sharma is the third or second leading wicket taker this year at the time of recording in T20s. And Smriti Mandhana scored a brilliant century in Australia and has now scored the most centuries of any woman ever in a calendar year. So there are still definitely some bright spots for India going forward, right?
Absolutely. As we mentioned a little earlier, there's so much talent. And I wouldn't even say potential. Like these are proven players. So it's not really about the potential, but when they play consistently, there's no one better to watch. Deepti Sharma is such an incredible player, incredibly versatile player to have. She can, bowl in so many places. I think she's come under a bit of pressure now. There's a bit of competition for places for that all-rounder spot as well, and off-spin bowler. But yeah, she's just such an incredible player to have in the team. Smriti, I think the one thing missing right now is captaincy. I know we haven't spoken about that yet, but it seems that Smriti is just primed to be, just the captain in waiting right now. There's so much she's done right, a test century in there as well. Her record chasing is just so incredible. You mentioned how we've been very critical about India, and I think this is where it comes down to. The level has just been raised so much. So you look at Smriti's 5 centuries and you say, that's just an incredible year. But there's still so much criticism she's coming under for not actually taking the team home, or for being the only person in the team that, like if Smriti plays, the team wins. So if she doesn't play, there's this added pressure on her as well. And I think the team are just fortunate to have to be in that position where they do have a match winner like that. I think Richa Ghosh as well, she's not played consistently, but just the class she showed in the starting of the WPL this year to help RCB win the title, and then later on she's been asked to do so many things, including open player number 3, finish the game. She's written her class 12 exams this year in the middle of all of this. So I think she's just an incredible talent that we have right now.
Yeah, I think Risha Ghosh has been asked about 4, 5, and 6 at certain points in T20s during this year as well. So yeah, and she is an incredible talent. Just this year alone in T20Is, Risha Ghosh in 14 innings has scored 279 runs and struck, most importantly, at 143.07, which is, I think, the highest of any Indian in the top 5. I will double check that, but I think it is. So it's a good point to make about Ghosh. Let's talk captaincy then. There have been a few questions over Harmanpreet Kaur's captaincy over the last year, particularly after the T20 World Cup being the second ICC competition India have lost this year. There have also been questions since that incident against Bangladesh in a series last year where she was punished for comments in a post-match interview and on-field behaviour. Having been India captain since 2018, so that's 6 years now, what do you make of Harmanpreet, the captain? Because we shouldn't question Harmanpreet the batter. We should just clarify there's no question over Harmanpreet's place in the side as a batter. She is one of the best batters in the world. But as a captain, what are your thoughts on her?
Again, it seems unusual that given there's so much churn in the team, in the management, in the backroom staff, that there's continued faith in her to deliver a tournament for India. As a captain, she brought about a change in the culture, which was needed. So over these years, I think that would be her legacy, that aggression, that understanding that the game has changed in a way that you have to go from ball one and you have to be willing to tinker your game as well. I think she's still known as a bit of a slow starter, but she has really changed her game as well, in which she tries to attack more of those balls in the first 10 balls that she faces, the kind of shot she's brought to her arsenal as well. So as you said, as a batter, that's great, but that's the sort of philosophy that percolates to the rest of the team as well. When you see your captain taking those, doing those battles and taking those risks early on. So it's not just the visible aggression on the field, which can sometimes be a bit off-putting, which may not sit very well with the rest of the team. I'm sure you have like introverts there who don't want someone yelling at their face. But beyond that aggression that we see on the field, I think it is that aggression that comes through in her innings and how she constructs her innings and how she's changed her approach to the game, to fitness. I think that there has been a bit of a revolution in fitness. I'm sure there are loads of people that say it's not good enough still, but the Indian team is pretty incredibly fit right now, and there is an emphasis on what you eat and what you know how you prepare for a game, which we may take for granted now, but even a few years ago, that wasn't the case. And she was the one that brought this culture change. And I think that will be her legacy. I mentioned before, now it comes to a thing of planning. Teams, given that there's an FTP in place, given that there's more of a clarity in what a team needs to do to develop over the next few years towards big competitions, that is available right now, which was not before. Like, you didn't know what game you were going to be playing 6 months from now. Given that, I think there is an opportunity for India to bring about that planning, and I'm not fully sure her captaincy can necessarily be a part of that right now. So we've just finished a T20 World Cup. It's time for another cycle. Maybe it is time for a change. It's not a bad time for a change. I don't know if the selectors are planning to wait for her to take that call, or whether they're going to push her a little bit. I don't see that happening right now, very honestly. So personally, I would say that it is time for a change, simply because there's been so much change in backroom staff as well. So maybe now it's time to look at the captain as well and just bring a little bit of stability and succession planning for the team as a whole over the next couple of years. The ODI as well, with the World Cup next year, I don't know if it's too late to do that in the ODIs, but definitely for the T20s. We just finished the World Cup. If we're planning for the next one, then why not now?
Do you think you touched on the future tour schedule, but do you think with the closeness of ICC competitions, we've said we've got a World Cup coming up in 9 months' time now, and then the following year we'll have about another year, and then there'll be another T20 World Cup. There are so many competitions now. Do you think that puts people off or puts sides off making big changes in their captaincy? You talked about splitting the T20 captaincy and the ODI captaincy,
Mhm.
but with so much crossover between the sides, you can see team management finding it a difficult time to make those big calls.
Possibly, but I also see teams being different enough to be, for it to be just be able to pull it off. India also do play tests more than they ever have. So there is that element as well. And you do have a few players in the test side who don't play limited formats. I know it's just like maybe one or two matches a year these days, but there is that as well. There is that is being, you can factor that into the thinking as well. So yeah, you make a good point, and I don't know if the teams play enough also for that split captaincy to really work. But it's probably worth trying for India right now. Simply because of where Smriti is at as well. She's 28 now, I think. How many years are you expecting her to play? Do you expect her to be captain for another 5, 7 years? If so, then now's a good time to bring her in.
We should
I
just
think
say
Mithali suggested a really younger captain, but I don't know if there's enough stability in the team as yet to plan so far ahead.
mm. We should just mention on the test match front, that's one area that India have had pretty unadulterated success in over the last few years. India haven't actually lost a test match since 2006, with a big gap there from they didn't play a test from 2006 to 2014. And having played 3 test matches in the last 12 months, they won all 3 by big margins on home soil. So that's one area we can say India have a complete success in at the minute. Moving on, the other big thing that's happening at the minute is the WPL. We're about to, or we just had the auction for the 2025 season last weekend at the time of recording, and that will be the 3rd edition of the tournament. Approaching the 3rd year now, what can you contextualize what exactly the WPL has done for cricket in India?
For people who are watching the game slowly, for the players itself, I think it's that sense of accountability that was missing. We've spoken about it a few times in this conversation. Why is a player dropped? Why are they picked? With the WPL, there's just no hiding that. So, when you have a Shikha Pandey who's doing so well for Delhi, when you have her being picked up on merit in the WPBL, making the team of the tournament there, but still not finding a place in the domestic setup, in India as well. you have more people sitting up and asking questions. 5 years ago, she might have disappeared without these opportunities. So there are a lot of senior players who have found another avenue to continue doing what they do so well, and get that acknowledgement, and also to give back to the system. When you have someone so restricted, when you have a system so restricted by age, you're saying, okay, she's too old to make a comeback to the team, or she's too old to make her debut right now. These are things that do come up very often. But yeah, you have these players challenging that notion, because you can't just have 16-year-olds and 20-year-olds making up a sport in a country. You need those, you need those old hands, those wise heads to bring them together and really build that team to success. Yeah, that is one excellent thing about the WPL. The money factor, of course, is there. There's so many players, who getting crores, which is great. But that's still a small number. I mean, it's life-changing numbers for them. I don't know if it's life-changing numbers for for the ecosystem itself, because there are hundreds of players. Like yesterday, I'm sorry, over the weekend, what was it? There were 19 players who were picked up from 100 odd listed. So it's life-changing amounts for a small number of players, but for the larger ecosystem, there's more work that needs to be done. Having said that, you can see some changes happening in the larger ecosystem as well. With the WPL, you have the scouting has just come in. You have some teams are sending out scouts to a lot of the under-19, under-23 competitions as well. You have a lot of teams calling in players for trials. So players also get exposed to basic expectations of fitness and techniques. You have a lot of people involved in these franchises saying, you have this 16, 17-year-old who's just, great talent, but some basic things as to, how you run, how you ground your bat, those seem to be missing, like, where you have your fielders, how you set your field. There's some very basic things that don't really click, when you run you single, when you keep strike. Just that thinking of playing in high pressure environments, how you train. You have Asha Joy, who spoke about Asha Shobna, who made it to the Indian team on the basis of her WPL performance for Bangalore. She's been in the system for over a decade, but she's saying it was only last year that she got this new understanding of the fitness levels involved, how to train for this, and all this happened even outside of the WPL season. That is this incremental advantage that the WPL offers outside of this, 1 month or however much it is of competition. There is an attempt to help the ecosystem the rest of the time when these people aren't actively involved as well.
I was trying to think before we started recording about the differences between the WPL and the 100 in terms of how they contribute to national sides. And one thing we've spoken about on the podcast a lot is how domestic players in the 100 really have struggled to make up the gap to international players who play in the 100. And what I think is the real difference in the WPL is that the WPL has been really successful in widening that talent pool to come into the India side. We think about Yastika Bhatia, who was able to come into the India side off the back of that. We also think about someone like Sab Panini Magana, who has come back into the India side of performances in the WPL. And that seems like, to me, almost the biggest success of the WPL, that it has widened that talent pool.
Yeah, I think this again is a slightly mixed one. The WPL was set up again to sort of help bridge this gap, which between the domestic and the international system. So you have a lot of players absolutely dominating domestic cricket, who, when they come into international cricket, just don't seem to be as strong. Meghna, that you mentioned, she's again, I think, having a pretty strong season at the domestic level. Shefali Verma was dropped from the Indian team, despite fairly decent performances in T20Is at least. She's again dominating attacks at the domestic thing. So they're evidently too good for the domestic level, at that level, but there's still this slight issue that happens when they take the step up. And the WPL was set up with, one of the objectives was to help bridge that gap. Yeah, I think the second year, if I remember, was a little better for domestic performances. Yasika Bhatia, yeah. I think the role clarity she got at Mumbai was something that she carried over to the Indian side. Maybe it was actually a little disappointing with how some formerly capped players performed, where it was still a lot of the internationals who needed to, win their sides matches. But yeah, I'm hopeful that over, this year and the following season as well, that gap will be less. You'll see more bowlers, especially among the wickets, and yeah, in the batting as well.
Who are your ones to watch for the 2025 competition who might not be on our radar currently?
Who are the ones to watch? Well, yesterday, Mumbai bought Kamalini, who is the 16-year-old from Tamil Nadu. She's a left-hand bat, can do a bit of wicket keeping as well. I don't know if she'll get into the squad directly, but she's had a good time. She just had a really good game for the under-19 team at the under-19 Asia Cup against Pakistan. She's known for hitting a few sixes. So I think everyone expects a fair bit from. Okay, no one's expecting her to do great things at 16 coming into the WPL, but she's definitely one to watch, and I think it'll be very exciting if she does have even a few moments of success. Who else should we watch out for? Delhi had a good buy again with Nandini Kashyap, another wicketkeeper. We suddenly seem to be having a lot of wicketkeepers who can bat a bit. She's got a call up as well for the West Indies tour. She's again had a good domestic season, able to bat a fair bit. I think Delhi were very pleased to get her at base price, so maybe she's another one to watch out for.
And just to finish up then on where India are at and looking forward to the next kind of 12 months. India are currently ranked third in the ICC ODI rankings. I think we said that already. Qualified directly, obviously, for the next World Cup. We've touched on the positives for India going forward. What are the biggest challenges they're going to face over the next couple of years going into that home World Cup, and how do you rate their chances of winning it and finally bringing home that ICC trophy?
I think the conversations we have about Indian women's cricket is very different from the one we'd have 5 years ago. The expectations right now are sky high. There's this expectation, I think slightly misguided, now that they have the WPL, they're among the most well-paid female sports persons around. So why are they not winning matches? And I think that is the expectation they're going to have to deal with a lot. The pressure that comes from this level of scrutiny is going to be sky high. I have sympathy for them. I don't think the criticism is out of place either. The calls for accountability from the selectors, from the coaching staff, from the team is very valid, especially because there are so many lives at stake. So many livelihoods at stake. I shouldn't say lives at stake. So the tendency to chop and change without taking into account what it does for the larger ecosystem. I think any criticism that happens about that, I think, is fully justified. And that is something the team definitely needs to get better at addressing. There will be an expectation for the team to win the tournament because, again, when we talk about India, Australia, England, I don't think playing semi-finals is acceptable anymore. You've been there, done that. Now it's about winning the tournament. We are learning is not going to cut it anymore, and I think that's something the team has to take on board and learn how to handle over the next few months. Harmanpreet Kaur keeps talking about the mental aspect of things, so I guess this comes under it, but maybe it's slightly different from how she sees it. So it's not really about performing in the pressure moments, which of course it is, but also building everything it takes to give yourself the best chance in those moments. Yeah, and they've also spoken about building a bench strength, which I think will happen. Again, there needs to be a coherent way of looking at the next few months. You're saying, okay, if you know that you have your eye on someone who you don't think is going to be ready right now to face Australia, but you send her, 6 months ahead on an A tour, there has to be a reason for that to sort of, feed her into, say, a tour of Australia in 6 months later or whatever, rather than waiting for, I don't know, a tour of Bangladesh in another 2 months. So I think it's just those sort of the planning that needs to get better.
Well, we'll see those plans come into action over the next 9 months building up to that World Cup. Cheers, Karunya. It's been great chatting to you. Thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Another huge thank you and well done to the 38 winners of the Metro Bank Champion of Girls Cricket in 2024. The work that you do to transform the game for girls is incredible. If you want to find out more about the fund, visit metrobankonline.co.uk/cricket.